conflict isn't something to fear, but a skill no one ever taught you. Women are often conditioned to keep the peace, stay quiet, and avoid discomfort, even at the expense of their mental health. In this episode, Dr. Jen Fry breaks down why conflict is actually a mental health imperative and how micro advocacy can rebuild confidence, and why your first no is the easiest and most important you'll ever say.
Have you ever felt something was wrong but couldn't explain it? Like the person you love was slowly chipping away at your sense of self?
We've been there. Different marriages, but to the same man, with the same toxic pattern. But God was still working.
We're Lizzie and Dina, women of faith, survivors, and truth tellers.
Surviving toxic relationships is for any woman stuck in confusion, healing after betrayal, or searching for her voice again.
You are not crazy.
You are deeply loved. Hey everybody, welcome today to Surviving Toxic Relationships. We are so excited to introduce our new friend and this amazing speaker, Dr. Jen Fry. I'm going to let her take it away and introduce herself and tell you what she's got going on and what she stands for. So take it away, Jen.
Ladies, I really appreciate you having me on this podcast. I think the work that you're doing is so instrumental in helping women in very nuanced ways that many times they don't appreciate it until they're out of it. And so this is such great stuff. Yeah, I come to you from college athletics. I'm a former college volleyball coach for about 15 years. I coach all over the US, decided to leave it, became a professional speaker, got my PhD in sports geography, probably one of the only people in the world. I also started a tech company, so did all that. I sit at the intersection of conflict and culture, and conflict's my jam. I love helping people understand who they are in relation to conflict. I love helping people better their relationships. My goal is to help 1 million people have a better relationship with conflict. And I think that the way to a better humanity is navigating conflict better. And I think as women, we are really told to not touch conflict in any way. And instead of being a part of it, we're expected to let it happen to us. And so the reason I think it's so important that women, for me, learn to self-advocate, set boundaries, and say no, it's because it's a mental health imperative. It is a lifestyle imperative, a health imperative, a family imperative, a work imperative, all of those aspects. I think if I can help women be better with conflict, it's really going to change lives.
Also, tell us about your book and where you're going with that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I wrote a book called I Said No. And for people who can't see, it's red and black and the no is humongous. We are in the middle of the holiday season right now. And I think that this is like the number one time of talking about boundaries and advocating for self. And there's so many people who are afraid to do it because they're more worried about hurting someone's feelings or someone being mad than they are themselves. And I see it so much of women putting themselves in really sad and disappointing positions because they're worried about upsetting a friend or a family member. And so I wrote the book to give women the ability to kind of, through stories, reflective questions, to say no, to think about themselves in a very different way. I tend to see a lot of women, especially around the holidays, to say, well, I'm just being forced to do this. I'm being forced to hold holiday dinner. I'm being forced to go here. And I'm always like, you're not. You just don't want to admit your decision. So it's easier to say that this is happening to me as opposed to saying I'm a part of the decision. And so my goal with the book is to give women a different viewpoint of themselves and to really get them to ask themselves, why not me? Why can't I advocate for myself? Why am I so worried about hurting people's feelings? Why am I so worried about someone being mad at me that I'm willing to put myself in bad positions? Because in reality, it starts when we're kids. And if our kids see us doing this, they're going to emulate the same thing. As a former college volleyball coach, I would see young ladies put themselves in such harmful positions that we would ask, you knew what was going on was wrong. And be like, yeah, I just didn't want to make someone mad. I just didn't want to leave my friend. And I'm like, we got to teach our young girls and young women how to advocate for themselves. And it starts with role modeling at the old age, because if we're not doing it, how can we expect our young people to do it? And so for me, the book is kind of this idea of helping them better understand themselves and what they can do to just live the life that they really want, understanding that when you live the life you want, there's going to be obstacles and potholes that you have to be willing to navigate.
That is so true. I think a lot of us, when we look back at toxic behaviors or not setting the healthy boundaries, a lot of it is stemmed from childhood, probably from poor self-esteem, confidence issues. So what are some tactics or strategies that would encourage people what that could look like or how they could set up those healthy just say no kind of scenarios? Cuz you said you had some like reflective questions and I'm sure there's some that our listeners would probably relate to and probably find very impactful even in their own lives.
Yeah, so I think kind of the first thing I would say is to start with micro advocacy. I cannot expect you to tell your mom that you're not going to make Thanksgiving dinner. Like that is such a big jump, right? You have this massive family, they're depending on you. To have you be like, Lizzie, just tell them you're not going to make dinner. Girl, that's just I'm setting you up for the okie doke. But what I can say is how do we start doing micro advocacy? See, might be you telling your kids that you're not going to sit during their practice. You're going to go have some coffee and read. Micro advocacy might be you're getting your nails done, they do the wrong color and you're like, that's the wrong color, please redo it. Micro advocacy might be you're at a restaurant and they get your meals cold and usually you just eat it. Now you're like, my fries are cold, can you please replace them? Micro advocacy might tell people I'm only bringing 2 sides, so y'all pick which 2 sides. Well, I know, I love this one, that one, I get it, but I'm only bringing 2. Like, so you have to start with baby steps to be able to build up the courage and the skill building to keep doing it. Right. So I think that's the first thing is like you have to have micro advocacy and not be afraid of being that person. How many of us are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be that person. And I tell them, I'll be that person every day, twice on Sunday. Like being that person does not bother me. It's not, so many people are worried about like humiliation, right, in public. Like, oh my gosh, if I say something, the waiter's going to be mad. Okay, your fries are cold. Like, no. And so I think it's kind of like not worried about being that person is going to help a lot. When you're so worried about being that person, you're not going to advocate for yourself. So like being okay with not being that person, with being that person. And also I think this is another step of micro advocacy is see how your friends around you and family handle when you advocate for yourself. That's a really important thing because that can make or break it. So I was at a restaurant and it was like happy hours, like kind of like all you can drink and eat for like $30. Wonderful price. I go up to pay and it's like 35. And I'm like, okay, everywhere it says 30. And the young lady was like, yeah, well, we raised our prices in the register. Okay, girl, it's not written down. So you need to charge me $30. And so now it's like, oh, well, I can't change it. Okay, I guess you're gonna have to call a manager. Like, so that's the first one right there where I'm advocating for myself to change the price. I'm advocating for myself for you to get the manager. Then the next thing that happens is that there's a lady sitting at the bar. And let me mind you, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not rude. I'm just directive. You're going to have to call the manager in this tone. So then the woman at the bar talks to the server who's helping me. She was like, you're doing amazing, girl. You're great. And I'm thinking like, that's not necessary. But what that is meant to do is to just have me not advocate for myself, right? If this outside force is trying to get me to be like, it's okay. It's fine. Right. That's like, and she's like, you're doing great. And I'm like, that's not needed. All that's meant to do is make me not advocate for myself. So now it's what the third, fourth way I'm having to advocate for myself. And so the micro advocacy is really building you up to withstand that. So you have to be like it, who you're around is really important. And I think sometimes people don't understand that when you have friends that don't advocate for themselves, then their goal is to stop you from advocating for yourself. They would do everything possible to silence you. And so friends and family around you. The next thing is you have to understand that more than likely, the first no or the first boundary you put up are actually going to be the easiest ones. They're actually going to be the easiest. Why so? It's because you don't have the peer pressure of family coming at you. So if I go and tell Lizzie, I'm like, hey, mom, I'm only going to bring 2 sides, right? So then guess what? Sister Deanna calls me, hey, I know you said you're going to have 2, but I really like sides 3 and 4. Then brother calls me, hey, I really like sides 6 and 7. And then someone calls, but I really love your ham. So now there's all this peer pressure I have to withstand for multiple people. So you have to understand your first no or boundary is going to be the easiest. But even though you feel it's the hardest, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm about to rip my shirt. This is so uncomfortable. Your first one is the easiest one because now you're going to have peer pressure coming from different ways that you have to be able to say, no, 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 no. Because guess what? If I crack for Deanna and say, okay, I'll make your side. Well, now brother's like, well, I heard you're making Deanna's. Can you make mine? Well, now I've heard this. And so now you've cracked it wide open and you're going to do everything. And so those are, I'd say, the main things is to micro advocacy, see how your friends and family handle you advocating for yourself, and then understand your first no or boundary is your easiest one.
That's excellent. Just to put this in perspective of a friend of mine who was in a very toxic relationship, and he was extremely financially abusive. And, of course, she didn't know it was financial abuse, right? They'd been married for 30 years and he just controlled every single penny and encouraged her to stay home and have kids.
Of course.
And they ended up having 7 kids.
Oh,
and
God.
She couldn't even go to the grocery store without literally being handed a certain amount of money and having to budget it to the penny and having to turn in receipts. And to her, because she married him young, she just didn't know that this was abnormal, right? So she finally, after 30 years, and was like, I want to go back to college. I want to make something of myself. I do not want to, these kids are grown. I don't need to be sitting at home with all these kids anymore. And so she's now realizing also that she is being very much abused because he withheld love and affection anytime she didn't obey him, those kinds of things. So she went to a therapist, and the therapist said, I know that you are getting your cabinets painted in the kitchen. And I know that you told your husband that you wanted to hire somebody because you were exhausted. And he said, absolutely not. If you want them done, you'll do them yourself. So the therapist told her, your first action is going to be that you go and tell him we are hiring somebody. It's just that simple. We can afford it. We're going to do it. And that was her very first micro advocacy. But of course, for her, it felt huge. Yeah. But she did it. And he just stared at her like she had 3 heads. He couldn't believe it. He was baffled. And you know what, though? He just kind of like, what? And pushed back. And she's like, I'm not budging. And he let her do it. And all of a sudden, she realizes that, the world is not going to crumble and she's not going to die if she stands up for herself. And that was where she finally started to take back, like you said, little pieces of her power, little pieces of her self-worth, little pieces of just her identity. And it was incredible. So I love that. Those are great examples. Now, tell us some things that really could speak to, and this is with all the boundaries, and everything that you talk about in your book. How about a woman that is sitting in a toxic relationship right now? She's feeling completely trapped. She's terrified. She doesn't know what to do because when she does finally try to take back some of her value, this person rages at her, bows up, rages, withholds love or affection, treats her like garbage. What can she do to hold her own and to take back some power for herself, for somebody that just makes sure it's not worth her while? Do you have any points for that?
Oh my God, that is so hard. And my heart goes out to that type of thing because it can feel like you're trapped like in a box. And in my opinion, it goes back to what are the small things that you can do? Because aggressiveness is a way to silence people. Even if I don't hit you, how I act when you do stuff, my goal is to silence you. And so then it becomes this kind of aspect of I'm going to tiptoe around to make sure I don't have to handle your anger. And so it goes back of what small things can you do for yourself to start building your self-confidence back? What type of decisions can you make to start building your self-confidence back? What kind of relationship building can you start doing? Because more than likely, you've been isolated away from your friends and family. So what type of relationship building can you start doing? Even, I hate to say it, even if it's in secret, what ways can you do that? What decisions, if you go to the supermarket, what things can you decide before that you didn't have those type of decisions? Because when we're talking about this level of aggression, I don't want to say most likely, but there's a potential that there's been violence there. And the one thing I will never tell people is to make these big leaps, because when there can be physical violence, when then there's, like you said, financial abuse, mental, there's all of these layers to it where you have someone that's like a beaten down racehorse. And to even, for some of them to even make one decision is so difficult because of how they've been treated. So for me, it's how can you start relationship building, and how can you start advocating for yourself or doing small things for yourself in maybe ways that aren't going to be noticed by them, but are really big for you.
Wow, that's really great. I love that. So you're not getting in their face, for the aggressor. Obviously, my friend that I referred to, her husband wasn't aggressive like that. He was just very passive aggressive. But, for someone that's an aggressor or, uses some violence, to get their way, coming at them and just suddenly laying down boundaries wouldn't be the best
No,
idea. But you're right. But
no.
them going and actually like doing those small little steps to build themselves up, whether that be reading self-help books or, like you said,
Mhm.
creating a community of support for themselves and having someone to talk to. That's great. I love that.
Yeah, and I think like, it reminds me of when I started entrepreneurship. I left coaching. I had my mortgage for my houses, but I didn't have kids. I had a cat. And so I was able to jump pretty freely because I didn't have the weight of other people I had to worry about. And so whenever people come and ask me about starting my own companies, I say that with the caveat of a single woman with a cat. I will never tell people with families to do what I did. Like that's a lie. That's a lie to be like, go and quit your job. You got your parents to caretake, and you have kids. I'm not telling you to do that ever. Same thing. If someone's in that type of relationship, I'm not like stand up to them and set boundaries. No, I'm not trying to get women killed. But what small things can you start doing? Saving money, right? Like, what's the small ways you can do it that also protect you? That's a big thing about it because some of the people live in like theoretical land. It's not practical land, nor is it like safe land.
I actually love that. That was a perfect saying right there, and it hits the nail front and center, like boom, it. And the hard thing is there are many of those women that need to hear what you just said probably aren't able to hear it until they're completely out of these toxic relationships. So I think for myself, if you know someone that's in these situations, these are great things to tell them. Do one thing that you can do for yourself, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even, if it's a situation where maybe you have the kids, can you take the kids somewhere where you enjoy eating? Right? Like just something of that nature. Those small things that for some people are really big, especially when you're in that type of relationship. What type of um autonomy can you build in under those constraints? I think so many people love to give advice that's super theoretical. And it's like that's not practical, it's not safe, it's not helpful, right? Like I'm not going to tell you go say no and stand in their face. No, I'm going to say, hey, what small things can you start doing to build yourself up? Hell, even if it's when they're gone for work, you're doing like a free online class, right? Like something like that, so that you're learning, but it's under the certain constraints you're in.
Yeah, so I read about, you teaching conflict as a way, that look at it more like it's a mirror to show you kind of where you're at instead of looking
Hmm.
at conflict like I'm the victim. This is, all
Hmm.
abuse. I'm always the victim of everybody, or you had a bad day and someone looked at you cross-eyed and you know what I mean? You just lost
Hmm.
your stuff. So talk more about conflict and maybe even in just everyday life or, in those serious situations, like go a little deeper on the conflict part. I think that's really fascinating. Like,
The one thing about being a steward of conflict, a topical expert, is that you talk about it so much, it changes you in ways you would never imagine. And that's how I feel is that it's not me just repeating, regurgitating content. Every time I talk about
mhm.
it, I peel a different layer off of who I am and how I grew up. And so I think when we talk about conflict in a personal way, you always have to connect it back to how you grew up. Always. Whether or not you want to admit it, it's a stain on you. And we really don't teach conflict as a skill. We don't talk about it as a skill. The people who grow up in households where conflict is healthy is a rarity, an absolute rarity. I remember reading like it was like an article or something, and a person was saying about how they grew up where if like there was a toy that both kids wanted, they had to do some type of like negotiating. It was like, okay, if you want this toy, it's worth like three chores, and like, okay, how bad do I want it? Is it worth three chores? And they would learn how to negotiate. And so the person was like, that's how I grew up. And then they're like, I get into a relationship and it's just silence. And I don't know how to navigate it because I grew up in this way of really thinking about how bad do I want to have the conflict? How bad do I want this? So I like my mom, Carol Fry, bless her soul, rest in peace. She was so conflict avoidant. But she also had five kids by the time she was 25 and then adopted me at 41. So when you have five kids by the time you're 25, you don't have time for conflict. right? You don't have any time to learn it, to build skill build, because skill build means kids are going to bump up against the edge. When you're teaching a kid how to self advocate, guess what? They're going to self advocate with you a whole ton. The word no, 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 no is going to come up. And you don't have time as a parent of 5 kids by the time you're 25 to deal with no. So my mom, I actually made her like a photo book, and her favorite phrase was because I said so. That's all you have time for. Like, that's just the reality of it. And so she didn't have conflict skills, so I didn't have conflict skills. And so I had to build those up. And, in some ways, your relationships are your guinea pigs. Each relationship you have is a guinea pig to make you better at it. If you reflect on it. I reflect in my past relationships. I'm like, okay, here I can see where I need to be better. Here is where I'm like, ugh, it wasn't that good. And I think sometimes it's really hard to self reflect because you didn't have to admit how much of an issue you were. There were points I was an issue, I was the problem. And it takes a healthy person to say, I was me, but now how am I going to make sure that doesn't happen again? And so my relationship with conflict is deep, one that I keep peeling back the layers. And because I've been consistently doing this work, I at least have like the foresight when things are happening to see how I'm interacting with it. Right before, people be like, "Oh, I went black. I didn't even know." In it, I can, okay, Jen. Even if I'm mad and be like, "Okay, you're probably going a little too far," but I know what's going on. I can self reflect of like, I was at Las Vegas for a conference, and I was trying to get into this room, and I like was following some people, and the woman came up and was like, "No, you can't do it." I'm like, "But they all were doing it," and she was like, "No, no," and she said something to the fact of like, "Is that okay?" And I was like, "No, it's not, but it's fine." And so I walk away, and then later on, I was like, "I was just upset, and she didn't deserve that." And so I just went up to her and I was like, "I'm sorry for what I said." And she was like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know what to do." And I was like, "Girl, that's my fault." Like, kept it moving, but I was able to reflect in the moment and still apologize. And I think so many people, that apology is so far from them. And for me, I've been able to become a better apologizer, because there's a phrase that I love. It says, conflict shows us the depth of our relationships. And the only way also that can show is if you're willing to apologize for stuff. You can't think your relationships are going to get deep if you're not willing to apologize, or they're going to apologize. You can't. And so for me, apologies are so critical because it kind of creates a shared humanity and allows us to move on to the next level.
Yes. And I think, for us as parents, it's good for them to see us apologize to them.
Hmm.
I made a mistake. And when I was listening to you talking about conflict, I couldn't help, because I'm a school teacher. And so I couldn't help but start thinking about one of the things that schools are really trying to bring back is problem solving. And to me,
Hmm.
problem solving can really correlate with solving in conflict. And it's really a skill, like you said, that is not really taught or learned the way it should be. And I know some schools are trying to bring back the problem solving, but everything is so rote of just sit down in your seat. This is how you do it. This is what you do. And teachers get so frazzled trying to do centers that make them learn problem solving so they don't do them. But anyway, that's kind of the correlation I had in my head.
That's good. But the thing also is that if you're teaching problem solving, you have to understand it's going to be ugly and messy.
Yeah,
Like, you have to leave room for that. And I think that's the problem, is so many people don't leave room for the ugly or messiness of it. See, if it doesn't work the first time, it's like, see, we tried it, it's not working. You're right,
exactly.
it's not
Yeah,
going to work the first time. And you
exactly.
have to be okay with that. And so many people aren't, where this is not like one of those surveyable, right? 1 through 10, did you learn about conflict? Yes. The way, to me, like, so my objective when I present is, one thing is that I want you to be able to, say that you did this better than a past version of yourself would ever done it. Like, that's my goal, is that you're going to be in situations and your past self will be proud of you, because you'll be like, look at how I handled this stuff. Well, I could have cussed them out. And so that's what my goal is. And that, like, you can't really survey that, right? Like, that's so difficult. And it's taking a long time. It takes you to be in the situation, realize you said something wrong, maybe apologize. So the next time you're in it, you're able to pause. And it's this, multi-step that you're going through and learning who you are in the middle, how your emotions, how are you feeling, right? Like, how is stuff going through your body? It's learning all of that stuff is a key thing that you can't, like, survey.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I love it. And today's world, I know I don't have to say this, but today's world, I mean, the conflict isn't even really allowed to happen, right? It's more like, you don't agree with me, I don't agree with you, so we're just going to divide, and isolate each other. And I think that's so sad because it's even happening in families, even when COVID came out, right? People were dividing, families were dividing, kids were dividing from their parents over, you got the vax, you didn't get the vax. I mean, it's a delicate subject, but it's really true. Like, there just isn't, that dialogue, to have the conflict and to be able to disagree just doesn't seem to be allowed in this day and age. And so if we're able to have conflict and talk it through, and still care about each other and give that mutual respect, it could change the whole world.
I will tell you this, and this might be right, like a crazy thing. If it's about somebody's identity,
Mm-hmm.
I am okay with dividing.
But let me clarify first, it's not
Yeah.
about identity at all. We all have our own identity, and that should never be challenged or part of conflict resolution.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we need to know, that's the whole point of being healthy, is
Yep.
knowing who you are, what you stand for, what you believe in, and we all have a right to have our own diverse beliefs and thoughts and cultures and everything else. I'm just talking about, it's just sad to me where, sometimes just disagreeing on a subject, on any kind of a subject is sad to me, that because, if you believe a certain way and I believe a different way, like, I want to respect that, and I want to still like have a relationship with people like that. With anybody that disagrees with me or where I stand, I still want a relationship. And I feel like that's possible if people aren't just immediately trying to divide and conquer anybody who
Mhm.
doesn't agree. I'm saying, so
Yeah.
just like, that's what I mean about that piece of conflict. But go ahead and say what was on your mind.
I think it's such a fascinating thing when we think about friends and family with kind of the dividing when it comes to conflict. I think with what we saw, right, with the COVID vaccine and the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated, I think part of it was, I think, how people treated, right? There was this aspect of, you're unvaccinated, you're a damn idiot, right? A lot of this fiery stuff around it. And I think it's this really nuanced topic that
Yeah.
includes health, that includes vulnerable populations. It includes all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I'm a person that if your family is not treating you in a healthy way, no amount of conflict resolution is going to solve that unless it's you hiding yourself. And
Right.
I think there are some conversations in families that haven't occurred. And because they haven't occurred, that's what's causing the breakdown of the family. I think we can agree if there's so many of like these conversations that are under the surface that everyone knows at dinner, don't mention this, don't mention that. And it's the only reason that they're saying not to mention is this idea of like, we got to keep the peace. When like the only person that's keeping the peace is the crappy person. They're over there like, loving life, and everyone else is upset. And so I think the biggest thing about it is, what type of conversation can we have? And is it one that the relationship can occur still as long as there's boundaries set?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So yeah, I'll come to Thanksgiving, but if Uncle Paul says these things, I'm out. And that's understood. And it's not like, I had a friend who, their sibling would say off the wall stuff, and their parent would expect my friend to stay around. And it's like, no, right? You can't expect these things to be said and her to stay around. And so I think that's the thing, is the conversations are nuanced, and many times it's not the conflict, it's how people are treated during the conflict, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's kind of my
you,
point. That's kind of my
yeah.
point. Someone comes over for Thanksgiving and they're a different, political party or whatever. Why can't you love them for who they are? And I think that's my point. It's just
Mhm.
frustrating that so much conflict has to be completely unreasonable, in my opinion. I think the world is just too divided, and I think there's too much hate. And I think that people use some of these things as a reason to hate other people. And
Mhm.
I think that there can be a healthy disagreement for where you stand, and a kind, respectful way to disagree about, well, this is kind of what I believe, but you get to believe how you want to believe as well. And then that's it. There's so many things to connect on that aren't divisive. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
to make somebody feel unwelcome, or they're not part of your family anymore, or they're not somebody that you are in your tribe because they've decided to make a different decision. That's all. I wish we had more connectedness and respect with,
Mhm.
we get to be individuals and make our
Mhm.
choices, and we can still be kind and respectful. But as you said, once it comes to someone is just subtle little digs and subtle abuses and trying to get an argument out of you or trying to constantly start that conversation, then absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, that's not.
100%.
Yeah, that is not going toward connectedness. It is not, it is not good. It's not trying to bond or understand that person or appreciate them for who they are. So, yeah, but I appreciate so much your book and your time today. Really, and great points, really good points. This is going to be really helpful to our audience, and everybody will have the link to her book in the description on the YouTube channel and the podcast. So go pick up a copy. I think it's going to be some valuable information for you as a parent, or if you're in a toxic relationship, or even just with everyday situations in your life. This is going to be something that's going to be useful.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah. I think some people don't realize in a normal day how much conflict there is.
Yeah.
And how sometimes they're super resentful at the conflict that they didn't say something, that when they get home, their partner and their kids get the brunt of it.
Well said.
Because they've been run over at work. Somebody just adds something to their plate and they just take it. And then they're at the grocery store, right? Like all these things, and they just take it. And then they get home and it's just all of it comes out. And so it's one of the things of, as in knowing that you have to stand up for yourself 1 or 2 times during the day. But it's worth it in the end.
It is. And you can do it in a kind, respectful way. Nobody needs to go around, being a bully. Because you can, even if you're standing up for what is right and what you should have as far as treatment, there's still a right way to do the right thing, and you can do this respectfully and you can do it kindly, but it needs to be firm. Because I've been at many jobs where I had a bully boss and I had no idea how to put down boundaries. I was absolutely clueless, and it cost me. And just like you said, I would go home and I would be upset and stressed out and frustrated and didn't want to go back. But the more that I let this person bully me, the more weird it was to stand up for myself, so you don't wait until it builds up to a point where you just explode all over that person, because now you're going to be the one that they pull into HR and say has a problem. But like you said,
it's going to be like a small thing, right? It's like a tiny thing you blow up, and now you had such an unreasonable response to something small. You're like, no, it wasn't that.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Because your tolerance for that behavior but a lot of times we will wait. We will wait until we're at that place so we get that emotional bravery to confront.
100%.
Yeah. So we wait till that happens. But the thing is, by the time that happens, you're in your emotions, you're not in logic. And now you're going to spew out everything that's happened for the past year. We do that to our spouses too. Like, you've been doing this for a year. And they're like,
even know.
Yeah, they're like, well, that's not fair, but so those little micro advocacies that you're talking about, where you just maybe have a small conversation, maybe just lay down some expectations so that you don't ever get there. And that also works with your kids, because raising 4 little kids, I finally realized that I would just let them get away with things until I started yelling at them. And then by then they're just like, but small little boundaries, and you're going to hold the line on this boundary. I'm not going to ask you 3 times. I'm going to ask you. And then you're not being the bad parent by yelling at your kids. So anyway, good stuff. Yes. So thank you so much, Jen. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who's learning how to use their voice, or who needs permission to say their first no. Conflict is not about winning. It's about honesty, boundaries, and self-respect. Please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time as we continue exploring the skills that help us grow personally, relationally, and emotionally.